Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel and welcome to my very first Grand Prix preview, I guess I kind of did one for Japan, but this is like the first one we're going to do in full, which is quite exciting. We're going to take a deep dive into the Chinese Grand Prix as it returns after a 5-year hiatus and have a look about what we might be able to expect from the weekend coming up, what we can expect in terms of upgrades, the track itself, because I know that some of you probably might not be very familiar with Shanghai as a circuit if you've not been watching F1 for that long. So there's a lot to dive into. Now, at the time of you guys watching this, we would have already had free practice and the sprint quali because we are back for a sprint weekend, which I'll get into in a minute. But obviously at the time of me recording this, it hasn't happened yet, so I don't know what the results are for that, and I'll talk about it a little bit, but don't expect me to talk in much detail about what's happened on Friday because I don't know. I'm not a time traveller, unfortunately. Also, just a quick side note, if you see me looking down, it's because I've got the track in front of me here, so if I'm sort of referencing the track, I'm going to be looking kind of at that, and then I'll have it on screen as well at the same time, so yeah. But anyway, let's get into it and talk all things Shanghai. So as I kind of mentioned, we haven't actually been to Shanghai in 5 years. 2019 was the last race we had here. Obviously due to things out of the track's control, things like COVID, travel restrictions and stuff like that, it's meant that we've not been able to return to China for a Grand Prix in a while, but we are now back. Obviously this means that there are some drivers that haven't raced here before, but we also have drivers that have raced it before and are very experienced in this track. Two that come to mind is Fernando Alonso and of course Lewis Hamilton. Now if you didn't know, Lewis Hamilton holds the record for most race wins, I believe it's 6 race wins he's got in China, so he's very accustomed to this track. A thing to note here is that doesn't necessarily mean be all and end all. This is a track that's been resurfaced, it's a track that haven't had much experience with these new generation of cars, so something to consider, but the people who have raced on the track before may have a slight advantage here this weekend. Another thing to note, as I kind of just mentioned a minute ago, this is our first sprint weekend of the 2024 season. There are some quick changes that we've made to, I'm Formula 1, that Formula 1 has made to the sprint weekend layouts. The new layout kind of goes like this on Friday, so tomorrow, I'm filming this on a Thursday, so tomorrow we'll be having our free practice one, just 1 hour session, and then the sprint quali. Then on Saturday we have the sprint race and then the Grand Prix quali, and then the Sunday, the Grand Prix itself. So we've got a lot of racing action over the weekend. Sprint races are a little bit more jam-packed, so if you're someone who's going to track for one of these races, this is a great opportunity for you. If you're someone who's watching it from home, you have to pay a little bit more attention to each day, which can be a bit annoying if you're someone who works on a Friday, but you know, it's worth watching, I think. And obviously sprint races are controversial, whether people like them or not. I personally don't mind them. I don't really have much feeling towards them. I like the extra racing action, but sometimes I find them a bit pointless. Depends on the track really, but yeah. Anyway, enough about context. Let's talk about the track itself because it's very interesting. I personally love it. I'm going to have it popped here, hence why I'm slightly right of camera today. Now, the track itself is a high drag track for sure. The tyres are going to suffer here. In particular, that front left tyre is one that's going to suffer at this circuit. We've seen it before. We've seen drivers come out and do practice laps and stuff around here. They say the front left is where they really feel it the most. And that's especially to do with the opening sequence. If we have a little look at that top part up here, the turns 1 to 3 in that kind of like snail-like sort of corner we have kind of going on there. That first corner is a really long right-hander, and that's why we're putting so much tension and pressure on that front left, and that's why we get so much deg in that sort of area. And there are other turns that put so much pressure on those tyres, but that turn in particular is like a bit of a killer for the tyres. Now, another thing that's really important about this track is the placement of the car. Obviously, if we have a look at the track, we can see it's very twisty, very turny, very technical. If your placement is off and you're getting bad exits out of corners, it will be detrimental. Especially in things like quali, if you put your car in the wrong place, it is really, you're going to suffer. And I think we're going to see that across this weekend, cars just not getting in the right place, especially for those those drivers, for example, who are a little bit less experienced. I feel like Logan Sargent may struggle around this track in particular because he can struggle with controlling and dictating where the car goes at times. So that'll be interesting to keep an eye out for, and I think the drivers who are a little bit more receptive to snappiness in the car will probably do better. So for example, Lando could do quite well this weekend, and Max, I think, in general, is quite good at getting control back of the car when it kind of snaps out of place, so something to watch out for there. Now this is a very mixed track. We've got some high speed, some low speed, some medium. I wouldn't necessarily brush it as a medium speed track. I'd say that's probably the best description if we're picking one, but it's a good mixture. So let's have a look at some track facts then. So the first Grand Prix here was in 2004. It's a very expensive track. I don't remember the exact figure, but it's up in the high millions of how much it costs to get this all prepared and sorted. So it's definitely worth looking into the history of this track. The Grand Prix here runs to 56 laps and it's 5.4 kilometres in length, so it's a decent, pretty standard track in terms of length and laps and stuff like that. We've got 2 DRS zones. As you can see, the first DRS zone is from turns 11 to 12 in that little sort of area there. And then you've also got a second DRS detection zone between turns 15 and 16. So a couple of really long straights here as well. So from turns 13 to 14, that back straight is one of the longest on the F1 calendar. And I think one of the longest in F1 period. I think it's 1.2 kilometers long or something like that. So cars that do particularly well in those straight line speed areas, I'm thinking cars like the Aston Martin, the Williams, stuff like that are going to do particularly well in that area. Cars that have a bit more drag, such as the Alpine, they've struggled with drag quite a lot this season. I mean, they've struggled a lot, but drag in particular may impact them this weekend a bit more than usual. Now, this isn't the only series that has raced here. F1 isn't the only thing. We've had MotoGP here for a few years in the early 2000s and Formula E races here, and it's going to be in Shanghai in late May, I believe. So if you do enjoy the circuit, look out for Formula E. I've really enjoyed the season so far if you've not watched it. Or look back on YouTube videos, things like MotoGP. MotoGP on this track in particular, it's decent. But anyway, now obviously I've mentioned before about tyres and how tyre deg is really going to come into play, especially in those opening parts of the circuit. But another thing that's going to be really important this weekend, not just tyre deg, but also balance setup, and the setups that the teams bring, especially with that only being one free practice session because of the sprint weekend. Setup is going to be so important. And with a track that does range from low speed to high speed, different downforce setups and stuff like that, this is going to be really important to get right. And they haven't got a very long time to get the data that they need. And also how quickly that we range from different types. So like I say, we have those turns 1 to 3 I've spoken about a lot, but I'm going to speak about it again. Low speed area, and then we go into turn 7 and 8, that sort of S's section that we have in the middle, which is a lot more different. It's a lot more higher speed. Going so quickly from that low speed to high speed, the balance in the car has to be perfect in order to really get the most out of the car. And for things like quali, that's going to be really important to see, and the cars that get the setup right are going to be the ones that are optimal on quali. Another part of the track that I would like to point out is turn 14. Again, I don't know whereabouts I'm going to have this position on the screen, so find turn 14. Is a hairpin, you should be able to spot it. I would say this was probably the main overtaking point. It's quite a slow corner, but it's a really great spot for overtaking. I think it's Esteban Ocon came out and said that this point in particular is a great spot that they always look out for when it comes to making those overtakes and making those turns. So something to look out for in the race. Now, in terms of tyre deg, another thing that I just want to quickly mention, the last time obviously we were here was in 2019. At that point we still had 13-inch tyres in use. We are working with a slightly different spec now, and fitted to a different generation of car as well. So the aerodynamics are very different in this car compared to the old car that we would have had last time we were here in Shanghai. The floors are very different, the floor sits a lot different. So with this being such a technical track in terms of turns, the floor of the car is also going to be really important. There is, I believe, Aston Martin, or was it Alpine? I think it's Alpine actually, I correct myself there. Alpine that have made quite a big change to the floor of their car this weekend, which I'll get into in a minute, but just something to, again, keep an eye out for. Now, in terms of the track itself, there have been some changes made ahead of the 2024 season. My favourite being the gravel trap that we have right at the end of the race, just coming out of that final corner. This is great. It's normally a runoff area here, and I think having a gravel trap is going to make it, one, much more important for the drivers in terms of trying to dictate that car and keeping control of it, rather than just being able to go into that runoff area. If you go into a gravel trap, we all know it's no good. So that will be interesting to kind of watch and see how drivers get on with that. And it's going to be particularly important again in quali. You don't want to risk, I guess, you don't want to risk going into that gravel trap because it's going to ruin your lap if you do end up there in quali. But it's also going to dictate how far drivers send it into that final corner, going up that last bit of the straight. So seeing who's, I guess, bravest in that respect and who is prepared to just throw the car into that corner despite there being a gravel trap will be very interesting, and another thing to watch out for this weekend. There are quite a few upgrades to a bunch of different aspects of the cars this weekend. I'm not going to go through all of them because I don't think I'll be able to explain them in enough justice, maybe another time, but not at the minute. But rear wings is a big point of difference here. There's actually a lot of variance in the rear wings of the cars this time around, which is quite, I guess, surprising. But the most surprising setups, I believe, are the cars who have gone for medium to low downforce setups. So Red Bull and Williams, I believe, had medium to low downforce setups and medium to low rear wings specifically. Now Red Bull, I can kind of expect this from. They get a lot of their aerodynamics from the floor of the car, so they rely on that floor to suck them in. And so the rear wing isn't necessarily as important to that aspect of the car, so they can be a little bit more experimental with that aspect. But the Williams, I am a bit shocked at. Now we do know that Williams, they don't have a particularly draggy car. They are quite quick on straight line speed, so I'm not necessarily surprised here, but with the drivers they've got in the car with Alex and Logan, with the luck they've had, this is definitely a risk. Especially in China, there will be a risk of rain, I believe, so this may not play out into their favour, but we would have to wait and see. Now, some cars have gone for medium in general. I believe Aston Martin have gone for medium to high. This, I think, will play into their hands quite nicely. With it being, again, quite a twisty, technical, turny track, I think the medium to high downforce setup might work better overall. Obviously, depending on the car. Red Bull I don't really include in that because we know that they are quite strong aerodynamically generally. But I think that the higher downforce setups may work better here. And so I think that Aston Martin have a good chance this weekend of getting a decent position overall. I've put Lance Stroll in my fantasy team this week. I was going to put Alonso in. I probably should have. The only reason I didn't is because I didn't have the money and I put different people in. I had to, you know, sort of be around. But I wanted at least one Aston Martin driver in this weekend based on that. So again, another thing to kind of keep in mind. The track conditions don't get particularly hot in China. I think it's quite a cool track. We're not going to see too much in terms of cooling inlet, so that's fine. And in terms of floors, Alpine were the big one to talk about. They've made a decent change to the underfloor. The way that they've kind of designed it now, or the upgrade that they've brought here, is going to direct more of that air to the diffuser, which is going to help again with that aerodynamic overall, and just redistributing the air in general to get that grip a little bit stronger. So Alpine could be making Alpine could be making some decent improvements this weekend. Hopefully, fingers crossed. I'd like to see a better race weekend from them, but we will see. Now, the RB, I believe, brought an upgrade to their floor last weekend in Japan. I didn't do too much content on Japan because I've had exams and stuff like that, but I'm pretty sure the RB brought a floor upgrade in Japan. I think they're keeping that on this weekend, and they did perform pretty well in Japan. Now that floor in particular was brought in to help with low speed corners. We have quite a few of them here in China, so I think this could be beneficial. I think Yuki could do particularly well this weekend. I think Daniel's got a very good track record in China, so again, there's another driver that I think with RB, if they've done the setup right this weekend, they have an experienced driver who's done well, and then Yuki, who I think is quite a risky driver. I think they could have a good weekend here too. Now, one of the key storylines this weekend, of course, is with Zhou Guanyu. He is the first Chinese driver, I believe, to go to a home race or to race in China, if that makes any sense. So I really do hope that he gets a good race weekend this weekend. It'll be quite nice. Now, in terms of other sort of storylines, like I said, so going around this weekend, we have contracts. Silly season is coming up. I am going to be doing a video on silly season in particular and contract rumours, contract predictions, all that kind of stuff. I'm not going to talk about Carlos too much, but Aston Martin and particularly Fernando Alonso is a big talking point, with him getting a contract extension, I believe, for 2 years, and then with the extension to potentially carry on in a different position. I personally believe that could be in the WEC. They've just announced their Valkyrie for the WEC, and it looks absolutely stunning, but I think that Alonso could be suited to endurance driving, so I think that endurance racing could be a next good step for him after he decides to leave. I would have maybe preferred it to be just a 1 year contract extension and then let someone else in, but I think we've kind of at a point now with Aston Martin where that doesn't look like it's going to happen unless Lance is going to go. And Fernando's happy, and they're happy with Fernando, so it is what it is. Not much you can do about that. But yeah, all in all, I'm excited for this weekend. Weather-wise, I think there's some rain expected. I don't know when, I haven't checked. It's just something that I see sort of circulating on social media, so I'll have to have another look. Again, I'm recording this on Thursday, so I don't know what the results of the sprint of like FP1 and what the sprint quali is looking like. Based on what I've said today, I think Aston Martin could be in a good position, and I'm saying these predictions sort of outside of expecting Ferrari and Red Bull to be performing well. I think they will, but yeah, I think that in terms of surprising or ones in that sort of top race that aren't those two, I think Aston Martin could do particularly well. I'm kind of umming and ahhing about McLaren. I feel like they could struggle. I feel like it will be a driver thing this weekend for them. I think Oscar may struggle at this track. I think Lando could potentially do a bit better. We'll just have to see. But I think that they could do a decent job. But Aston Martin and McLaren, I think, are going to be surprising this weekend. And then, as always, I've said it every single week so far, keep an eye out on Haas, because I don't know, I just think they've got something special going on there. So nothing to look at. But yeah, that is my preview all finished for you today. If you did enjoy it, let me know. Whatever your predictions are for this weekend, leave it in the comments. I love hearing people's predictions and knowing who they think is going to win. I want to hear who you think is going to be on the podium, and one bold prediction. So my podium prediction is, now I need to think about it. Okay, my podium prediction is Max, we'll say Max, Lando, Fernando. Why not? That feels right. I feel like I just preemptively put Max on top. Who knows? But Max, Lando, Fernando. That sounds good to me. And my bold prediction is that I'm gonna say that one of the Alpines will get in the points. That's insane. That's absolutely insane. But do you know what? It's a bold prediction for a reason. It's not supposed to be. It's not supposed to be logical. So there we go. They're my predictions for the weekend. So put yours below too. Yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say. I will do a review of this weekend at some point next week. But yeah,